Hi everyone, welcome to Must Read Monday. My name is Dabney. I'm the young adult librarian at the Twin Lakes Library System, and I use they, them pronouns. Today is the first day of Pride Month, and I was planning to talk to you all about some of my favorite LGBTQ plus books. However, in light of everything that is happening in Minnesota and in the rest of the United States, I think it's more urgent right now to talk about books that specifically address social justice and racism and police brutality. So I picked out some books today that are about those topics, and most of them are by authors of color, specifically Black authors. So just as a warning, these books are about some pretty heavy topics, and they can be at times somewhat graphic. And people might think, those are not appropriate for kids or teens to read, but as George M. Johnson, one of the authors I'll be telling you all about today, said in his book, these are things that he grew up dealing with as a child and a teen and a young adult. And these are things that other youth of color are dealing with right now. So that's why we're going to be talking about them, because they are important. However, if this is something that triggers you in any way, please take care of yourself when making the decision whether to watch this video or not. So I am going to get started, and the first book I'm going to talk about is one that a lot of people probably know about. It is The Hate U Give by Angie Thomas, and unfortunately I don't have a copy of the book to show you, so that's why I was showing you that printout of the cover, because our copy is checked out at the moment. But this book is really amazing, and it was adapted into a movie that's like a really good movie adaptation. And so this is the story of Star Carter. So Star is growing up in a predominantly Black neighborhood, but going to school at a predominantly white prep school out in the suburbs. And so in the book, she talks about how she kind of has to code switch between like how she presents herself when she's at home, when she's with her friends in the neighborhood, and then like when she's around her like white peers at school. And she's like kind of got this balancing act down. And then one weekend she goes to a party, and then while she's there, she reconnects with her childhood friend Khalil. And while they're at the party, like a fight breaks out and they have to leave. And so Khalil is driving her home when they're pulled over by a white police officer. The officer asks for Khalil to get out of the car and ends up shooting and killing him in front of Star, even though Khalil is unarmed. So Star is like traumatized by what has happened, and after this occurs, she's trying to figure out like, is she going to like make a public statement about this or keep quiet, because if she does come public, there are some safety issues for her, not just from the police, but from some certain people in her community. So she's trying to figure out how to deal with all of this while like no one at school knows what happened, but she's hearing like more of her white classmates kind of slandering Khalil and just repeating what they've heard on the news, things that like he's a thug or he's a drug dealer, and it gets to the point like she just can't take that anymore. And she ends up becoming involved with the protests that are happening after his death, and speaking up for Khalil and trying to get justice for him. And it's a very, very powerful story. And yeah, it's an audiobook on RBDigital, so I'd recommend giving that a listen. My next book I want to talk to you about is Dear Martin. This is by Nic Stone, and Nic Stone lives in Atlanta. So this book has a lot of similarities to The Hate U Give, because it is about a shooting and police brutality and racism. So in this book, Justice is the main character, and like Star, he is going to a predominantly white school, and while he's in school there, he has white friends, but even though they're friends, like, these people are still, like, perpetrating, like, microaggressions and saying racist things and then acting like, racism is not a problem anymore, that everyone is equal. Things like affirmative action, they think is a bad thing and unfair. So, Justice is dealing with all of that. And then in the book, he had also previously been arrested and hurt by an officer when he was just trying to help a friend out. And then later in the book, one of his friends is shot and killed by an off-duty white police officer. And when that shooting happens, Justice is also injured. And like Star, he's kind of witnessing this, like, media frenzy of everyone trying to blame him and his friend Manny and not blame the officer who shot Manny. And so he's also trying to find a way to get justice for Manny and to be heard. So this is like a very intense book. It's a very quick read, very short book. There's a lot packed in here. So yeah, I definitely recommend reading it. It's an audiobook on RBDigital. And then my next book, Dear Martin is not online. Just kidding. But you can check it out from the library soon, hopefully. My next book is All American Boys, and this was co-written by Jason Reynolds and Brendan Kiely. And FYI, anything by Jason Reynolds is gold. It's really great. Like, he's an amazing author, so you should check him out. But this is another book that addresses police brutality. So it's told from two points of view. The one point of view is from Rashad, and he is a black teen who was attacked by a white police officer and, hurt really badly and hospitalized. And, like, there's no consequences for the officer. The other point of view is from Quinn, who is a white classmate of Rashad. And Quinn witnesses this attack and decides not to come forward because, this was filmed. There are other witnesses, and he feels like his voice is not needed. Also, he knows the officer. Like, he's friends with the family, and he feels like he can't come forward. Like, and that he's kind of torn between, should he speak up or should he stay, like, loyal to this, like, kind of second family of his. And so, yeah, both boys are kind of dealing with what happens, and there's a protest that forms around it, and, they're trying to each of them is trying to find a way to see that justice is done and sort of work through these issues. And this is an audiobook on RBDigital. My next book I was going to talk about anyways for Pride Month, and that's the wrong book. Anger is a Gift by Mark Oshiro. So this book is very, very intense. I think I binge read this one because, like, it's a pretty heartbreaking story. It also deals with police brutality and racism, and also another shooting. So the main character in this book is Moss, and he is a black teen growing up in Oakland, California. When he was younger, his father was shot and killed by a police officer. Again, it was a situation where his father was just, walking home from the store and was shot and killed. And so even though, Moss's community rallied around, this and were protesting, they never got justice for his father. And Moss has grown up dealing with that and dealing with some mental health issues like anxiety and panic attacks, and PTSD related to this event. And so in the story, he's going to a public school, and the school institutes some, like, pretty harsh security measures. Like, they bring in police to, like, patrol at the school. They install, like, a new metal detector that's really, like, scary, intense, and one of his friends is actually injured while going through the metal detector, and that sparks off like a student-led protest against these policing measures in their school, and the protest leads to another shooting, and I'm not going to go too much into that because spoilers, and an even larger like citywide protest that comes out of that. So yeah, it's a very, very intense book, but one of the reasons I was going to bring it up for Pride Month is that like pretty much all the teen characters are somewhere in the LGBTQ plus community, and they're all really lovely and real, and you know, even though the story is very sad, and also makes me really angry too, you know, they're great characters to read, and even in the midst of like a lot of really bad things happening, there's still like joy and love, and yeah, it's so good. It's a audiobook on Hoopla. My next book I don't have a copy of, but it is All Boys Aren't Blue by George M. Johnson. This just got published recently. It is a memoir manifesto that he wrote about his experience growing up, in his words, as Black and queer. So I have been listening to the audiobook on Hoopla, and I have like about less than an hour left, and you know, in this memoir he's narrating like significant moments in his life, you know, starting when he's like 5 years old through college. And he says in his author note, he mentions that, you know, this book does deal with some triggering topics like racism and homophobia and transphobia, sexual assault, slurs, sexual content. So it is really intense, but, you know, like I said earlier, he talks about, like, these are all things that happened to him as a youth, and these are things that are happening to other kids and teens. And, you know, one thing I love about memoirs versus, you know, novels, because, you know, novels, of course, I love, but memoirs they really do put you in this person's, like, authentic, lived-in experience, and it's very raw and real, and I feel like I've learned so much just from, like, listening to this book, so I really recommend that. Another book, this one's not online, but I read it recently, and it's really good, and that is Pet by Akwaeke Emezi, and I think I mispronounced her name, but this book, the main character is Jam, and Jam is a trans girl, and she is growing up in a society that is kind of like an ideal, almost utopia society. So it's come out of like the people overthrowing the corrupt government and systems. I think they've gotten rid of like the police and prisons, and instead of people like being in prison forever, they are like re-educated. So it's just, there had been like this intense upheaval, and now they're kind of living in this really great world where there's just kind of like equality across the board. And anyways, there's like some fantasy elements to this because Jam accidentally brings an angel into her world, and the angel is there to hunt a monster, which is what they called the people who were like perpetrating like the corrupt governments and systems. They were the monsters who had to be defeated. And so, you know, everyone now believes that there are no monsters, there are no more problems, everyone's better, and they don't even really talk about, you know, the kids who are growing up now don't even really know about all the bad stuff that happened in the past because the adults don't really want to talk about it. And they're just like, no, it's better now. So anyways, the angel comes to Jam and tells her, you know, that somebody is hurting her friend. And, you know, that leads Jam into researching, like, what is happening. And, you know, it's almost like a fable because, you know, there's this bad thing that's happening within her friend's family, and none of the adults want to know about it or hear about it because they think it doesn't exist. And so it's like Jam and her friend trying to figure out how to get the truth out there, how to change things, how to get the adults to believe them. And it's a really, really gripping story and very short. So, yes, I think I said that one's not online. It's not online. And then my last book selection is a bit different because all of my previous books are by authors of color. Most of them are by Black authors, and this one is by a white author. But I thought it was kind of important to talk about because it does give the other side of the issue. So all these are kind of about people of color combating racism. And this book, last book, is Devils Within by S.F. Henson. And this is about a boy who was raised in a white supremacist compound. So, we'll jump right into it. So Nate is the main character. He's grown up in a white supremacist compound. His father is actually the leader there, and his whole life he's been taught to hate anyone who's different from him, and even taken out into different communities to target people and attack them. But when he's 14 years old, Nate kills his father in self-defense, and he's like taken from the compound, put into a treatment center, and then eventually his uncle comes to get him, and he goes to live with his uncle. So his uncle has basically had cut ties with the family and really distanced himself from them because he didn't want to have anything to do with white supremacy anymore, and like he's changed. So at first they have like a really contentious relationship because his uncle doesn't really want Nate to be there. He doesn't want to be around that mindset anymore. But Nate gets put into public school, and suddenly he's around all these people he's been told to hate. And he's like learning firsthand that like these things he'd been taught about people who are different from him, they're not true. And also like his identity's been kept secret so that his classmates don't know like who he is. But his first friend is a Black student named Brandon, and so Brandon befriends Nate and like brings him over to his house, and Nate is like, having his eyes open and just really realizing like how wrong he had been in his thinking, and is like changing, and so they become friends, and a lot of other stuff happens in the book with like Nate really having to confront these white supremacists and like fight back against them in order to protect like his town and his friends. So it is like a really intense read, but I think it's important because it does directly address and call out white supremacy, and is like, this is a problem in our country that people don't want to talk about and realize exists, but it does. And on the other hand, it kind of also has this message that, people who maybe have been raised in racist environments, that, they can learn and they can change if they're willing to make that change. So this is also an ebook on Hoopla. And yeah, that is it for my talk. I am going to have a list of books coming out with more titles you could read, and as well as like more resources dealing with like social justice and being anti-racist. I know that there's been some books already shared on our Instagram page about that. But yeah, thank you for tuning in, and yes, we'll see you all next time. Bye.